Okay, everybody. Good evening. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Ann McCudden, the director here at the History Center. And I changed my setup this time, so I'm in my office. So I hope it's not too cluttered behind me. But thanks for joining us for our second lecture of our Spring Sips and Slides series. And as you know, we'll start with the sips in just a minute. But we're really, we're following along in the theme for this year about sort of environmental history and awareness and things along those lines. So we found a great speaker for you tonight, Mr. Rick Van Noy, who I'll introduce him in just a second. But as you know, we got to start with the sips part. We got to start with the cocktail. So this week, Ephraim did a great job last time, but this time we went and got a specialty bartender down at Liam's to make us a delicious cucumber gimlet. So we're going to play that video for you, and then I'll do an introduction. I'm sorry?
There's no audio on the video.
Yeah, there's no audio on the video. You're just going to watch the lovely bartender at Liam's make the cocktail. But we do have the recipe at the bottom if you want to try it. And by the way, I stayed afterwards and drank it, and it was delicious. All right, didn't that look delicious? And as I said, it was quite refreshing. So hopefully you guys have a cocktail yourself at home. We gave you a recipe for a different cocktail, but hopefully you're comfortable at home, enjoying yourself, ready to learn a lot from our speaker. So let me do my introduction here, and then we'll get started. We have with us tonight Rick Van Noy, who grew up in a small New Jersey town. In fact, he's got a sign behind his head that says Titusville. That's not Titusville, Florida. Apparently that's Titusville, New Jersey. A small town on the Delaware River, actually just up from where Washington crossed on Christmas Eve. He had stints in Colorado, Washington, and Ohio, and then moved to Radford, Virginia for a position in the English department at Radford University, and loves it for the nature, the clean waterways, the lovely mountains, etc. He's the author of a number of things, so I'm just going to give you a snapshot of a few of them, but he's the author of Surveying the Interior, Literary Cartographers and the Sense of Place, A Natural Sense of Wonder, Connecting Kids with Nature Through the Seasons, and of course the book that we're focusing on this evening, Sudden Spring, Stories of Adaptation in a Climate-Changed South, which, by the way, is available at the bookshelf downtown. And you can also buy it, through our website or through the links that we send. I read it; it was wonderful, great, great background on some climate issues in the South. His work has been anthologized in a number of works, including Teaching the Literature of Climate Change, Teaching Hemingway in the Natural World, and Thinking Continental, and Writing Local in a Global World. He currently teaches courses in the environmental humanities, creative nonfiction, professional writing, and American literature. So it's actually a really interesting combination, and I picked up on that obviously in his writing as well, of the, sort of folding in the writing styles and the English and the literature with the science and the climate change and adaptation. So just a reminder again, we have a chat room and we have a Q&A. chat is sort of to be used, that's seen by everybody, and that's sort of, you know, say hi to somebody or do something like that. Q&A is where you can put questions at any point during the presentation. We'll see those only, and I'll read those out to Rick at the end because we'll have a few minutes for Q&A at the end. So sit back, relax, enjoy the presentation, and we're going to pass it. I'm going to turn my video off and I'm going to pass it over to Rick.
All right, thank you, Anne. Thank you everyone for joining in. Cheers. Glad to share some tips and slides with you. I was going to talk about, as Anne mentioned, this book, Sudden Spring, about climate change and adapting to climate change in the South. Although, in a way, the kind of galvanizing moment for it happened when I was up north. So I was on a boat in Glacier Bay, Alaska. We were kind of doing a slow turn, kind of gawking at the glacier and the beauty. And then, you know, giant, I forget how high this is, like 250 feet or something like that. Glacier calved off and fell into the bay. And so it's sort of like while you're looking at this beauty, you're also looking at this kind of underlying brokenness or fracture. Not that the beauty still isn't there, even in the fracture, but something was definitely amiss. And, you know, I was thinking at that time that it would be a great project to focus on like climate change as it's happening in some of the national parks, and maybe especially like this one or Glacier in Montana. But I also thought that's kind of the picture that people already have of climate change. And I really wanted to localize it. It's not just something happening far north, but happening, you know, in our own backyards, closer to home, including national parks that are closer to home. I think I'm frozen here, but let me try to get unfrozen. One second. I don't seem to be able to advance slides, guys. I'm just gonna have to do it this way. That's okay. So here's the you can see this slide, yes? Anyway, so this is now, instead of the far north, instead of this, you know, this is more the picture I wanted to present. And this is Norfolk, Virginia on a sunny day. Here we go. Yeah, so on a sunny day, I traveled from where I am in Virginia, I guess about 3 hours, a little bit more, to Norfolk. And there was a rainstorm here, and there was, and then increasingly places are seeing what are called these rain bombs. So these intensified rainstorms. There's more moisture in the atmosphere as a result of climate change. But this was more just kind of a westerly wind that had pushed some water up into this, well, parking area and nearby boat ramp. Now this area in parts of Norfolk, and this is true in some other places in the South, was built on what's called a legacy creek, or a creek that was a creek, but it was filled in. So it was probably a wetland and, you know, material added to it. And as one person said to me, you know, a creek really wants to be a creek. So it was sort of returning to its former state. But here's where we were. We're about to put the boat in and go on a tour on the Lafayette River, and this is Lafayette Towers. Some people would say to me, well, why is an English professor interested in climate change? And that was, you know, part of what I wanted to do, is take it out of the, say, the realm of numbers and more into the realm of narrative, or, you know, kind of get into the stories, like who is it really affecting and how. But of course there was also this irony that we almost couldn't get the boat into the water. And, you know, English professors and writers are sort of pay attention to ironies like that. And Norfolk is, of course, home to the Navy. And there was a further irony that day, and that these piers had to be shut down. You know, the boats are fine. They float when there's a higher tide, more water. But all the infrastructure supporting these piers, the electrical lines, power lines, those are affected. And that's something the Navy is having to deal with, is preparing for this. And they're not really debating it. They are trying to get ready. Not just the infrastructure, but also the getting to the base. You know, so I had trouble getting to this parking lot because of the water. And my, you know, GPS didn't really reroute for like water in the road. So that becomes an issue. But then we got into the boat and we were touring the river, and this is a neighborhood. And as you can see, this is a street, and this is just what's called a sunny day flood. And so this kind of egret was like just a minute ago in this person's lawn, and here's the street, and these cars right here, you know, they're not getting out anytime soon. President Obama's former science advisor said that we basically have three choices when it comes to climate change. We can adapt, we can mitigate, or we can suffer. And how much of the last one kind of depends on what we do, how much of the first two we do. Mitigate, of course, is doing things to kind of, you know, lessen the impact of climate change. So it would involve reducing our carbon footprint and probably getting off fossil fuels. But even if we do that, and I hope we do, we're still, you know, some of the kind of excess gas, the heat trapping gases that are in the atmosphere are still going to be there for some time. So we're still going to have to adapt to some extent. And what does that mean? Well, these people aren't going to be able to leave relatively soon. There was a monitoring station over here at this corner, this intersection, and that was going to be like a communication system that would alert people that, yeah, a flood was coming, or a king tide was coming, so they could kind of respond and plan accordingly. But, you know, if there was an emergency or something like that, that could be a serious problem. And that was a problem in some other places in the region. Another thing they might have to do to adapt is declare some of these properties, maybe not these ones, as what are called repetitive losses. So the city or somebody else, maybe FEMA, is going to contribute some money to buy out these properties. But that's a real thorny discussion. That's a real difficult discussion to have. And identifying which ones has proven to be difficult. Norfolk and some other places on the East Coast have seen 14.5 inches of sea level rise since the 30s. And they know because they keep good records, because here's the Navy, and they've kept those records over time. Now that's higher than the national average. I think the average is about 8 to 9 inches. That's closer to what they're seeing, say, in Florida, perhaps Georgia too. But that region is experiencing something called glacial rebound, which means that the land is basically, it was kind of propped up from the ice age. So it was high, and it's kind of like when you get off of an air mattress, the person who was, you know, if you sat down and propped a person up and you got off, that would come back down. So that sinking is the land coming back down. So sea level rise can be relative. It can be one thing in one place. I mean, it's happening all over the place, but the rate can be different in different places depending on some other factors like that, like other kinds of erosion or other things. When I was in that region, that Hampton Roads, Chesapeake Bay region, I did go out to an island called Tangier. And this is kind of interesting for history persons. There's a kind of a long history here. I mean, John Smith kind of came through. I think he called it Russell's Island, named after the physique or the doctor, I think, on the ship. That would have been like 1608. The British, I think this was called Fort Albion in the War of 1812. And there's but what's difficult here, and the people also speak this interesting dialect, this kind of West Country dialect. And they still, and partially because they're isolated, they've just kind of retained that dialect. So it's kind of an interesting place to visit. But as you can see, a lot of these kind of creeks and ditches and rivers snake through here. And on Tangier, they've lost 2/3 of their landmass. So this is a map on the wall in a museum, and there's like a faint pencil tracing that sometimes that kind of points out where things used to be. It's hard, you can't really see it on my picture. And this is the harbor, and people here are the dominant industry is crabbing and oyster fishing, or oyster gathering. But they've lost 2/3 of their landmass, and they want a seawall to kind of help go around the island, but that would cost about $30 million. Now, the Corps of Engineers has given them 2.5 or authorized 2.5, but that's just kind of to protect this harbor. So it may not protect all of the land. So they've got an issue, and one writer has called them among the nation's first climate change refugees. There's about 450 people on the island, and so they may have to move if things don't improve. Now, one of the problems is this island right here, where there used to be a former hunting lodge and some people live there. This is eroding faster than the mainland, which is a little bit higher. And it's only about 4 feet above sea level. And there are some estimates, and it depends on some of those mitigation factors and other things. But by most estimates, we could see about 3 feet of sea level rise by the end of the century, which means that they don't have a lot of room for error. So I got to go on a tour, though, of this. This is partially serving as a barrier, as a buffer, this island over here. And it's called Upwards because the people would say they were going upward. And on it, there's this remnant of these tombstones from our graveyard. And then there's also a shell midden from when Native Americans, I think it was the Pocomoke, lived there. And we were also trying to find arrowheads. And I think Carol, my host, said they once found coins from the 1800s. So there were all these kind of cool historical artifacts. This is the town back here, and there's a water tower that you can see. But while we were walking, and this is a grave that got washed out, and another here. And so this is kind of a ghastly scene. And this is something that sometimes happens when you're looking at climate change. But we were walking, and I was maybe not here, maybe more over here. I'm trying to find an arrowhead. But maybe as we got closer to this scene, I'm still scanning the ground. And then she said, "Don't step there. There's a leg bone." And she meant a leg bone, from one of the graves. So some of the, some skeletons have gotten washed out. The Virginia State Archaeological Association had to be called in to do something with the graves and kind of, document this. But this is what she's seeing. And she kept pointing to pieces of land and saying, that was land last year, and it's not. And she grew quite concerned because she was recognizing that fate of her community was at stake. Yet, what gets complicated on Tangier and some other places is they do not necessarily, believe's the wrong word, but I guess it is believe in their case, in the science of climate change. Although she said, we'll call it whatever you want to call it if we can get the help that we need. So I called that first chapter, I think I called Tombstones by the Sea, and that's why that title. And that was sort of a precursor of some of the things I was seeing from some other communities. Back to not Norfolk, but Virginia Beach. I called this slide our best defense because of the Navy. But one of the things that the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and their boat, which was called the Bay Oyster, were talking about is that rather than harden the shoreline and create this kind of hardened structure like they did here, which just kind of led to worse erosion and, you know, water kind of found the weakness, they were advocating these oyster shells that were tucked in plastic netting. And what happens when you lay those oyster bags down is the waves bring some of the sand and silt in, and that gets trapped in the oyster bags, oyster shells, and it sort of builds up the coast rather than makes the erosion problem worse. And it's called a living shoreline because the oyster shells can attract other oysters, and they could plant native seagrasses, and it's kind of and it filters the bay. So it's a much better solution. And then there was a further irony, and that what they were telling me is that the kind of lowly oyster was among our best choices for coastal defense. So I guess that's a further irony when you're in the shadow of the Navy. This is also in Virginia Beach, and this is maybe an illustration of more of the mitigation side of things. So this is the Brock Environmental Center, and the Chesapeake Bay Foundation has this, and it was built on a point in a way like lighthouses used to be built for, you know, for ships. But they had, I guess, done just about everything they could in an environmentally sound way. They produce about 80% more energy than they use. These paving bricks, maybe not here, but further back in the driveway, were permeable. And so it was a sort of laboratory, or in my mind, in a way, a kind of lighthouse or beacon, at least, for the way forward. And I think they're about 8 to 10 feet above projected sea level. So they're kind of planning for the future, building for the future, and aware of some of the issues that are going on. And I think this is maybe supposed to be built like a shell or an oyster. It probably is. And that's a picture of my feet. And I'll explain. But I was then in North Carolina, and I was in a place called the Alligator Wildlife Refuge. And you cross that to get to the Outer Banks. And I'd gone to the Outer Banks, and I'd talked to some people, talked to some people about climate change. And I'd gotten into the, there's the Yale Center for Climate Change Communication has what are called the 6 Americas, and it kind of breaks Americans down into 6 groups. And at one side are alarmed, concerned. So alarmed is the farthest, being alarmed about climate change, then concerned, then cautious, and then doubtful and dismissive, or disengaged, doubtful, dismissive. And I kept kind of thinking about, you know, what it might take to sort of move people in, I guess, the more concerned direction. And I was learning about some of the adaptations they were doing here. So some of these ditches that they had made to build roads, they had installed basically like a kind of bladder so that water could be released, but salt water could not come back in, because if the salt water comes in, it erodes the soil and makes the problem that some of the problems they're seeing worse. But when I was paddling, I saw an alligator, and I not only saw it, but it kind of like, you know, did a swirl, and I saw a tail. And I think I say in the book, I may or I may not have seen fangs, but fangs are beside the point. They came with the body. And I don't, maybe you guys are somewhat used to seeing alligators, but it's not a normal occurrence for me. But what it did is it activated sort of the reptilian brain, right? It activated this sort of fear center. And it was right at the moment when I was thinking about, you know, kind of the ending for this essay. And I thought, I joked in the book about leg gruesomely ripped off by massive reptile was not the ending I wanted, nor was professor's body found floating in lake. But in a way I had, you know, part of the problem with climate change and its communication is that if there was an alarm that went off, you know, we would know what to do. But because climate change is this kind of slow moving problem, there's definitely a delay in our action. And this is on the other side, I think, of this is in Nag's Head, and this is the Bayside. And you see this in a lot of places. I think I saw this in Georgia a lot too. And these are called ghost forests or ghost trees. And they're called that because they look kind of ghostly. They look like, well, I guess in a way, skeletons of their former selves. Saltwater rose came in, drowned the roots. When the roots are gone, that made the erosion problem worse. And, you know, that's another side of adaptation that I think they're confronting on Tangier. And maybe when you sort of read about this and you studied this, you know, you do feel a certain amount of sadness or grief. I think Ann and I were talking about this just before we started, which is another kind of adaptation, right, that we need to think about. And of course, you only feel that if you sort of lean into it or think about it or confront it, because there may be some who aren't so concerned, right, from that Center for Climate Change Communication. In South Carolina, I went after, I think, Matthew, and there's a video online of me rescuing a fish from not right here, but a fish had come over the battery, the seawall, and was kind of swimming around near the curb. And I stopped to try to rescue this fish and throw it back over. And someone stopped to kind of narrate this journey. I was there with the Weather Channel. It almost felt like we were competing media or something like that. You know, writer, and then TV. Sometimes TV doesn't communicate the climate change aspects of hurricanes. It's not that they're more frequent, but they do seem to have gotten more intense. And, you know, Charleston really had a succession of them. You know, I think it was like 3 Octobers in a row where they had some really bad storms and flooding. And Charleston has issues because they're also built on some of those kind of legacy creeks, wetlands. And then there are these historic homes. And that was another thing that was happening in Norfolk, is you've got these historic homes. So raising them is kind of a problem, because then you destroy the kind of historic character of the homes and the you know, the way that people like those living spaces. But it's an issue. And then the city engineer in Charleston did send me this, and I was talking about this with another group the other day. So one of the things they're thinking about is, and I think they're already doing, is a 10-foot diameter stormwater tunnel under the city. So you can Google pictures of Charleston and flooding and see people kayaking in the streets. And the engineer called it a circulatory system. for the city, and it's $235 million, and they have a $150 million annual budget. So for a city their size, that's a pretty big investment. Norfolk, by comparison, is putting about $1 billion into kind of climate change, sea level rise, infrastructure, with about $1 billion annual budget. And I think I have in the book some figures for Miami Beach and Miami too, which I think is about the same. It's one of the things about the economics that can frustrate you is, you know, sometimes there's an argument that doing something about climate change or planning or adapting will cost too much. But in many cases, it seems the exact reverse. Like if we don't plan, if we don't, it's going to be even more costly. There'll be even more suffering. And I also have those figures in the book about the, you know, some of the costs of those hurricanes, say Harvey in Texas and others. I guess here's one for, I mean, this was just outside of Beaufort. This is the Big Chill house. So some of you might have seen the movie The Big Chill. And I don't know, I think I happened to be there. And so not only did I see fish out of water, but when I was walking around this property, there were crabs in the lawn, and it was for sale. So you could buy a little piece of cinema history, but I think it was going to be $4 million. And I wanted to call the realtor and pretend that I could buy it, but then ask about any flooding impacts. And all that realtor said was it didn't flood while she had it listed. So that's all I learned about the Big Warm House or the Big Chill house. I think this was actually Sullivan's Island, but nearby there's a Folly Beach, which seemed like a kind of interesting name, because one of the things they do to the beaches is they nourish them, which just means they're going to pump sand. And if you remember from your sandcastle building days, the waves could do a number on your sandcastle. So sand's not a good material to stop erosion, and this looks like some kind of loss or repetitive loss. I don't know the full story. In Georgia, I went to Tybee Island and some other islands, but I also went to Cumberland. And on Cumberland, I got to talk to Carol Ruckteschell. I don't know if some of you know her or have heard of her. There's a book on her called The Wildest Woman in the World, I think, by Will Harlan. But I got to talk to her, and she spends her mornings often on the beach on this kind of little ATV, and she looks for things that are washed up on shore. She's kind of a marine scientist or biologist, especially studies sea turtles. And that was one of the things I wanted to find out from her is, could sea turtles and say the change in beaches or erosion be affected by climate change? And for the most part, her answer was no. Because they've been around for 250 million years, and they're going to be okay. But the theme I kind of got into in that chapter is that to get to the north end of the island, it was 11 miles. And I had gotten there on the spur of the moment, and I wildly underestimated how far it was to the other end of the island. And it was like a 95-degree day, and I was hiking. And I was thinking about why we do that, why we underestimate, let's say, problems ahead of us, or how long a drive will take. Or my students will underestimate how much time it might take to, say, write a paper. And that's a kind of optimism bias that's kind of built in. On the walk to Carol's place, you pass Plum Orchard, which was built by the Carnegies. And this was kind of interesting from a historical perspective, because it was like this Gatsby-esque mansion, and it had among one of the first elevators and one of the first ice makers, but empty now. The Carnegies got snubbed from the Jekyll Island group, right? And so, and bought, you know, parts or almost all of Cumberland and built several places there. You know, it's hard to talk to students about how wealthy they were, but, you know, they're like, Carnegies were like Mark Zuckerberg and, I don't know, Jeff Bezos combined, I think, in terms of wealth. But nearby, and then of course for me, and I'd also like maybe not brought enough water, or on parts of Cumberland, you have to boil your water, and I might not have had enough gas. So again, I was thinking about the optimism bias. But at Plum Orchard, there was the most valuable of all this stuff is there was a little hose spigot over here on the side. And that was, you know, just part of the journey. And this is at the north end of the island near Carol's place. And that's a picture of my son. But what a contrast. And it was kind of getting me thinking about the inequities that are involved. For most people, when they look at what will happen with climate change, it affects the poor and disadvantaged disproportionately. Many with means can get out of there, can evacuate. And so I was definitely thinking about that. But Carol also had this museum, and she had this concept of what she called useful death. Like she hoped that some of the things that she had found on the shore would be useful to study, I guess like archives in a way, like they might be useful in some way to people in the future, you know, like some key to the diet of, you know, something in these jars is unlocked, you know, could be unlocked in here, and we could learn valuable clues about the past that might inform the present a little bit. You can see some turtle shells over here. I think there's some snakes in here. It looks like an octopus. But then I got to the Isle of Jean Charles in Louisiana. And so I've gone to New Orleans, but also down here. And that's if you look at the boot of Louisiana, the very bottom of the boot. And this is a community of a mixed tribe of Native Americans, about 25 families. And these are also among, so on Tangier, they've lost 2/3 of their land mass. Here, they've lost 98%. But it's complicated. It's not just sea level rise, climate change. General Honore, you know, said to me that it might also be, you might remember him from like Katrina. If you look at some of these kind of straight lines that are out here, you know, there's a lot of oil and gas drilling, and so some of that industrial activity and that drilling and laying of pipelines has exacerbated the erosion problems, plus the kind of channelization of the Mississippi River has pushed some of the sediment out past where it normally would, and so a lot of this doesn't get replenished. Now, what's sad here is, yeah, they may have to leave. There's $50 million of housing and urban development money to move some of the residents off the island. But who pays for that? Yeah, it's not some of the persons or, you know, who might have been responsible for some of this industrial damage. So that's sort of an interesting aspect of this story. When you know, and as I said here, yeah, NOAA released an updated nautical chart that removed 40 place names in a single parish just south of New Orleans. The song by Bob Dylan, Tangled Up in Blue, where he worked on a fishing boat right outside of Delacroix. Yeah, if you look on a kind of Google map, Delacroix looks like not much more than marsh or mangroves. This is the sign that you see when you get to the island. it says, some people want to move, they can go, but leave us alone. The people have the right to live where they want, not where people tell them to go and live. They say the island is fading away, and soon we will not have an island left. If the island is not good, stay away. May God bless the island. So I don't know, I almost thought about turning around, but then I said, well, the island looks good to me. And I happen to have a canoe on my car. And I think the canoe was sort of my calling card, because I think this person, Edison Dardar, thought maybe I was looking to fish, and then we could have a conversation. And we talked, and I asked him about moving and why he didn't want to move, and he just didn't. He said, this is where I've lived, and there are fish here, and people have always fished here. So this is where it really gets complicated. And he said to me, what am I going to eat there? When they wanted him to move to a place called Thibodeau. And he said, what am I going to eat there? Chicken? And he said chicken, kind of derisively. And I'd also snapped this picture. I kind of got out of my car and was trying to there were two great horned owls up and this is a ghost tree, right? This is a tree that's been probably a live oak, but they were up in this tree, and this had kind of a, I don't know, ominous, but also beautiful. Yeah, well, in a way, that sort of beauty and brokenness again. And I kind of thought about them as I was leaving, and the owls being comfortable in the night, and Edison and his brothers. I also talked to his brothers who were in another cabin. And that was a kind of profound experience. And I had 3 college students with me, my son and 2 others. They were going to kind of paddle some of the bayous. And, but the problem there with the Olives on Charles is there's 25 families. And if it's difficult to plan for and kind of relocate, especially 25 families, well, think about now how complicated it is for, say, New Orleans or Miami, exponentially more complicated. And that's an area that people are studying and thinking about, is the kind of demographic changes and where are people going to go if they have to move, if they have to kind of move off certain places. But one person did say, and I was thinking a lot about young people here, that if you get this and you plan for it, things will be okay. I think I followed up with, and if not, and he said, it's going to be chaos. And he was he was a geologist that's even on the high end of projections. So there are some projections that say 3 feet, but there are some that look at worst case scenarios, and they're much, much worse. I don't know, I might get back to that reptilian brain thing. I don't know if people can deal with that, accept that, if we're talking about, say, 10 feet of sea level rise. Norfolk and other places do work with the Dutch who have seen this as like a planning problem. They've said, let's kind of move some places off the coast and let's build these. Well, they have, these giant seawalls, and that's one of the things they're talking about in some places like New Orleans and also Galveston, Texas, and also Norfolk. So it might be that that's where we're going to go. But I also got to Florida, and there's lots of interesting things there. But I went all the way down to, I went to Big Pine Key, and there were lots of, and saw some problems there. But I also went to Key West, because I'm an English professor, and I thought I'd check out Hemingway's house. But it was crowded, and I didn't want to wait in line. So I went to his bar, not his bar, but the bar he gave a name to, Sloppy Joe's. And I parked nearby this rolling reefer, which somehow captured some spirit of Key West, I guess. And in the bar, someone said to me, so usually I would talk to people and I would ask them some things, and they might say why, and then I would say, I'm working on a book about climate change. And then I never knew how the conversation would go after that, you know, my friend or foe, but usually I found we could have a conversation. There was maybe one time when someone just let me know it was kind of impolite to have that conversation right then. And that was in Charleston, and it was a Sunday, and it was after church, and it was after a hurricane. So it was probably the wrong time. But I usually found that we could have a conversation. And this person talked about Key West and riding out some of the storms. But then he said, and he was maybe had, you know, just a little bit, he had more than one sip, let's just say that. And he said, what one thing can we realistically do? And that was kind of a question that lingered as I was driving home. And I think I talk about, you know, how there isn't just one thing. There's probably a lot of things, a lot of little things. The climate change, a lot of little things and some big things. I think the climate change communicator, Catherine Hayhoe, says there's no silver bullet, but there might be silver buckshot. And then this was Big Pine Key. So, and this was before Irma, and I think Irma made it even worse, according to the kind of person I contacted there. But Florida has problems. It's on, you know, it's on limestone. And, you know, one person said that Florida gets water from 4 sides, both sides of the peninsula, rain, but then, you know, the limestone is also porous, so it can come up from the bottom. And that's the issue with the key deer in Big Pine Key, in part, is they're losing some of the freshwater lens where they would get their water from, the deer that is. And when salt water comes in, it really just kind of sits on and gets saturated in that limestone. And that's why you're seeing some of these trees that are more ghost trees, kind of harbingers of what's to come. But this person I was talking to was working pretty hard to save Big Pine Key and his nature preserves. And that was part of what I was trying to get at in the book, is the way that we have to, even though it's a kind of global planetary issue, in a way it seems like localizing it is the only way to kind of conceptualize it in some way. And I like that quote from Marjorie Stoneham Douglas: the Everglades is a test. If we pass it, we get to keep the planet. Some of my students only know that name. You know, she wrote the book River of Grass, but they know that name because of unfortunately, because of the shooting, and not because of her, I guess, kind of conservation Everglades legacy. So that's pretty much the talk. I would entertain some questions. I'd be glad to answer them.
Thank you very much, Rick. Interesting. It's kind of neat to see the pictures that go along with the book that I read, obviously. And, you know, having lived in South Florida, a few different places, I sort of could definitely commiserate with your interactions of things down there. Like I said, I was only there for 25 years, and I saw Miami. I didn't live in Miami Beach, but I could see places like that starting to flood. And so a very real thing for sure. I know we have, I have a personal question I want to start with, if that's all right. I'm just going to go ahead and do that. You mentioned in your book that there's, you know, with a lot of other, I guess, other things, meaning other topics, maybe political topics or things, there could be a Pearl Harbor moment. So when Pearl Harbor happened, we enter the war. But you don't think, I mean, did I get that right from your book, that you don't think there is any sort of climactic Pearl Harbor moment that could get people, you know, or legislatures or things moving enough to make change because they're like quick, or, you know, okay, it floods, but then the water goes away, and that we won't, I mean, you almost want to don't think, okay, what would a really big Pearl Harbor moment mean, you know, environmentally? Well, we've had Katrina, we've had Harvey, we've had all these things. Did I sort of pick up on that correctly?
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, I guess I thought they would have to, you know, after one of these disasters, we might kind of finally come around. That doesn't seem to be the case, does it? I mean, it doesn't seem like there's been anything that's really changed the debate yet. Although there's a lot of positive news, I'll say that. I mean, I think that when I looked at that Yale Center for Climate Change Communication survey, I think it might have been, well, 40% of the people didn't think climate change would affect them personally, and that number is a lot higher. And it's something like 70 or 75% are now in the concerned, alarmed, concerned, and maybe cautious category. So it's in this sort of, the direction of, okay, something's happening, but maybe still not thinking that, I don't know, we have to do something about it. And that's where it kind of gets, difficult. Or they might not be willing to pay even, and that was a problem in New Orleans, pay even like a couple dollars, whatever, a week to, to pay for something that might address this. So yeah, I don't know. I don't think there hasn't really been a moment. I don't know if there actually will be, but there might be a sort of, it might be like other kinds of social change, just might take a little bit of time. The whole question is like, is time running out? And are we, I think I say we're running this sort of race between salvation and destruction, which is what it feels like. Although, I mean, I think, the current administration is about to unveil like a pretty huge thing that will probably get some cities and places some help that they need. And that seems like a pretty good start. So.
Well, and do you think those numbers of people that believe that climate change is, in imminent danger go up based on whether or not they themselves, I've lived through hurricanes, everybody's probably lived through something, but
yeah.
I mean, to me, it seems like you only have to go through that once to believe it, but I guess there are people that need maybe repeated reminders, or they're just so cushioned from the effects of a flood or a forest fire that they don't feel the impacts. I'm not sure.
Yeah, there's still some who that still think that maybe that's just that we're just in a cycle, or maybe we're just in a who are very just, I guess, doubtful. But yeah, I think you're starting to see it, so I did kind of focus on the coast some, because that's where I could sort of see some immediate effects and some adaptation measures, but you're starting to see it more and more. And so like I have a chapter in West Virginia too, and they're seeing more and more rain, and that's because there's more moisture in the atmosphere. So there's flooding in some places. In California last year, there are fires. Actually, some of the fires in California also did seem to be a pretty important, lead to some important discussions about climate, but maybe also, I don't know, land use policy and things like that. So it's not just the coast. So does someone in Iowa or care about it? I think they're starting to come around to the way this could affect crops and other things. And so it's not just a Miami problem or a polar problem, that it's starting to pinch you in other places. Even heat, I think heat kills more people than heat in cities kills more than tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, etc. combined. So just the excess heat that we've got is like another kind of thing we'll have to think about and address.
We do have I have another question. Somebody wanted to know, I guess, if you, in a nutshell, what are the best ways for an individual to reduce their personal carbon footprint?
I don't know if I've taken that that test recently. I think driving less seems to help, and like what does add? What does? I mean, there's probably lots of little things. I don't know if there's any single one thing.
I mean, I know that, like me personally, I always think about, okay, I want to use less plastic. I want to
less plastic.
I already drive a lot less than I used to, so I think I'm good there. But I suppose people equate, want to know what change their personal habits, and that's a great question, because all those millions of people change their personal habits, and we will have a big effect.
Yeah, I mean, we would basically have to, we want to transform some of the ways that we transport people, which, you know, might involve more public transportation, or maybe we start moving towards more electric and hybrid cars, but also transform food. A lot of the carbon comes from the ways that we consume food or produce food. Eating less meat would help, from what I understand. But then also energy, right? So maybe installing, you know, solar would be the actual best way. I mean, I don't think I've, you know, kind of looked at those numbers recently, so I sort of forget. And yeah, someone talks about a Manhattan project, and that was a push, I think, a few years ago, which is true. It might take, you know, we used to, we planted those victory gardens, right, during World War II, and it almost would seem to take that kind of collective effort, although it seems like it's hard then again to, without that Pearl Harbor moment, to get that kind of collective action going. So as much as important as it is on a personal level, it's also going to take a kind of, you know, governmental leadership level to start incentivizing these things and pushing these things. And that's why the Manhattan Project idea is probably a, you know, really important one.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think that, yeah, I think it's probably, I'm sure it's a combination of a personal Pearl Harbor moment or a regional one or things like that. Yeah. But I suppose that we all just continue to do, I'm sorry, I'm reading one last question here, do what we can to, let's see, I don't hear much talk about this. Oh, okay, so somebody wanted you to touch upon the concept of overpopulation and what that is, its effect on the environment.
Yeah, well, I guess that, you know, Michael, yeah, devastated. And I think I did go down there recently and saw some of that devastation in, like, near Panama City. And it probably, I think Harvey was the same way. So the warmer temperatures in the Gulf, the warmer water temperatures, so a lot of that excess heat is stored in the oceans. And I think that excess heat then leads to, you know, more intensified wind, more moisture. So yeah, I think it went from a category 3 to, I guess, to a 5. And that's what, you know, so scientists are saying it's not necessarily the frequency of the storms, but the intensity of them that's really hurting us. I mean, the overpopulation one is a difficult one to address. I know, I hear you. It might just be that I would probably go back to better planning in terms of our, I mean, some of the places that might have been affected were places that maybe weren't so smart to build in anyway. So it might just be more that we need to be smarter about how we're using land or building. I think overpopulation, yeah, I don't know what to do about that. Like saying,
I don't know if I expect you to fix that tonight. That might be a big
yeah.
Thing, but...
That's a hard one to tackle without sounding like a, I don't know, misanthrope, but I hear you. And that was a big push in, say, the 60s was overpopulation. Oh, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that as well, but maybe he just wants them to buy more cars. I don't know.
And he's, I think, also looking at Mars. Right.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. You can write that book too when you have time.
All right.
But no, we had some.
I'll need a bigger travel budget.
Yeah, you would need. Well, let's see. Thanks so much for presenting with us. I mean, I feel like I could, you know, talk about this topic for quite a while because it's just so. I don't know. I think it's near and dear to everybody. Like you said, it's not just people on the coast, or it's not just people in California or things like that.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad we had a nice engaged group tonight. and as Beth, one of our one of our attendees points out, we just got to keep talking about it, probably.
Yeah, that's the main thing I take away from it too. I mean, I think, starting to talk about it in different groups, and I found that you could have a discussion about it, and I think it is starting to look a little more positive in terms of the more people who are more concerned and engaged. So,
well, we thought,
I take hope from that.
I'm sure people were thinking, History Center, what does that have to do with it? But of course, first of all, you cover long spans of time when you're talking about climate change, but we just think it's relevant to as much as what we do to, where we live. So we'll keep the conversations going, that's for sure. And I just want to remind folks that we will post this presentation online and on our website and stuff, and give us a few days to get that up and ready. So if anybody else, if anybody who couldn't join us tonight, they can watch it that way. And other than that, I just want to say thank you, Rick, very much. I appreciate, we saw Rick's book listed on the UGA website, and as an author on this topic, and contacted him, and you've just been wonderful right from the get-go. You were like, absolutely, I'll do it. Would love to have had you in person, but not an option right now. And the attendees are saying thank you as well. So,
all right, thanks.
Yeah, I'll probably follow up with you in a week or so and give you some give you some ways to get copies of the program and all that. But if there's nothing else, we just want to say thank you. We're all got your questions answered, and we'll make sure I'm reading everything here correct. Yeah. And we'll keep the conversation going somehow. And I'm going to remind everybody again, Rick's book, Sudden Spring, is available for sale at the bookshelf downtown from Annie. So it's great to frequent a local bookseller and buy the book and read it and enjoy it. So anything else, Rick?
No, thanks. I have you can reach me through a website or through the university. I have email if you wanted to follow up with something like that, or
absolutely, yeah. I'm sure you'd be open for people if they wanted to contact you and ask you any questions or anything.
Sure.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Have a good evening. Enjoy those cocktails, and we'll be back in the fall. I'm not really sure if we know entirely what our theme is going to be, but it'll be good. It'll be good, and we'll have more presentations. There'll probably be webinars as well, but we'd rather be safe than sorry. So thanks, everybody, for joining us tonight. And thank you, Rick, very much for being our guest speaker. And I hope I did a good enough job watching the camera and not something else, but I think I did an okay job. And we will see you guys all soon. So thank you.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.